New writers often wonder how necessary it is to make their protagonist important. That can be answered with a question. How important do you want your protagonist to be? And that question can be answered with another question. How important is your story to you? In other words, if your story isn't at all important to you, then your protagonist is equally unimportant. But if your story is greatly important to you, then your protagonist is equally important. I use the word equally in relation to your story and your protagonist for one specific reason. And that is because, good or bad, your protagonist is your story. Time for another of my little tales. A young woman named Nyla, who still lived at home with her mother, envied her older sister for being independent enough to go out into the world on her own and live the life the two of them dreamed of as children. Several times Nyla's mother had tried different ways of enticing her daughter to finally leave home and begin a life of her own. But Nyla would find an excuse for not being able to leave and year after year remained at home. Nyla had always been the type of child that didn't take to others as easily as her sister. She rarely made friends at school, and after getting her job at the local library, she kept to her duties away from everyone so she wouldn't have to engage in conversation. Then, one year, their mother passed away, and after Nyla's sister returned, they buried their mother after an extremely nice ceremony. For the first part of the reception, Nyla's sister did most of the work, meeting and greeting friends and family, while Nyla kept to herself, making sure the food and drink was available for whomever wanted it. There was a young man, about Nyla's age, the son of a distant friend of the recently deceased mother, that had been eyeing Nyla a great deal. Finally, he got the courage to approach her and begin a conversation. As you would expect, Nyla, having noticed him before, saw his approach and found a reason to leave the room. But Joseph was determined to meet Nyla, finding her to be such a beautiful woman. When he caught up to her in the hallway, he realized she had been waiting for him, but too shy to start up a conversation in front of a room full of friends and family. They hit it off immediately, like they were meant for each other. Which was odd, since Nyla, until that moment, hadn't found an interest in anyone before. When the last of the guests were making their way home from the reception place, Nyla's sister cleaned up, giving her sister the chance to spend more time with the young man she was clearly taken with. Then, when it was time to leave, they made plans to get together again, and then he got into his car and drove off. It was at that moment Nyla realized that she didn't get his phone number or anything that would aid her in contacting him. She had also forgotten to give him her information. Her sister, feeling sorry for her, swore that she would do anything she could to bring them together. For the next few weeks, each day, either before or after her shift at the library, Nyla would visit the reception hall in hopes that Joseph had stopped by and inquired about her. But each day was the same, no Joseph. Nyla was going out of her mind. She couldn't sleep, she barely ate, and she rarely showed up for her job at the library. Then one day, she had an idea. She suddenly knew how to finally see Joseph again. Today, I'll discuss exactly what your protagonist is and how important your protagonist is to your story. And then at the end of this video, I'll tell you what Nyla's idea was. Simply put, your protagonist is a fancy word for your main character. And he is the most important aspect of your story or any story ever written. You may have noticed that I refer to the protagonist as he. I don't want you to think that protagonist is the technical term for a male main character and there is some sort of other technical name for a female one. Not at all. The term protagonist refers to both male and female, animal and even inanimate object. In the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, the protagonist is a middle-aged man named Atticus Finch. In the novel The Diary of Anne Frank, the protagonist is a teenage girl named, you may have guessed it, Anne Frank. But it doesn't end there. In the novel Charlotte's Web, the protagonist is a pig named Wilbur. And in the novel Toy Story, the protagonist is a pull-string cowboy doll named Woody. But because it would be too lengthy for me to continually say he, she, it each time I refer to the protagonist, I'll just choose the term he, unless differentiating amongst them is relevant. The protagonist, like I said earlier, is your story. And that is because he is your reason for writing your story in the first place. Think about it. You always need a reason for your story. And that reason is always to get your protagonist from point A to point B. Point A being the start of your story, and point B being the end of your story. There really isn't any other reason for writing a story. The Count of Monte Cristo, the protagonist, Edmond Dantes, has been accused of a crime he didn't commit and wrongfully imprisoned. Now, although a lot happens with this character throughout the novel, he spends time in prison, learns the whereabouts of a great treasure, becomes one of the wealthiest men, and then uses his power to exact revenge on those who have wronged him. He is the story, and without him, there would be no story. Another example would be Moby Dick. The protagonist, Captain Ahab, feels he has been wronged by a white whale, and although common sense might otherwise convince him to let this one go, his obsessive desire for revenge will not allow him to. The entire story focuses on this incessant obsession to kill the whale. Take Ahab, the protagonist, out of this story, and all you have is a whale left alone. The protagonist is so vital to any story that you just can't have a story without one. Every story has one, and every story needs one. You might be able to find something without a protagonist, but I can assure you it won't be a story. Now, having said that, there are stories where there are more than one main character, and some would call these stories without a protagonist. That then begs the question, can you have more than one protagonist in a story? That I'll discuss with you in a later video. For today, let's concentrate on the one protagonist story. Think about this. Anything can be a story. Time for one of my example stories. Let's make you the protagonist. Your mother asks you to run to the store and buy a loaf of bread, some cheese, a carton of juice, and some apples for dessert. All of these so she can make your lunch. She gives you the money and you head out to the store. It's not too far, but you use any excuse to ride your bicycle. When you arrive at the store, you drop your bike outside the door and rush inside. But while you are inside buying the groceries, someone steals your bike. You come out of the store to find it missing. A homeless man who has been sleeping on a park bench tells you he saw who took your bike and will tell you the direction they went if you give him your loaf of bread. You realize that you can't go home without your bike, especially after your mother warned you about leaving it unchained. So, you trade the bread for information. You then rush off through the park in the direction the homeless man directed you to go. You come to a fork in the path. Not knowing which one to take, you stop and stare hopelessly from one path to the other. Eventually, a young man on his afternoon run happens by. You stop him and ask if he has seen anyone ride past on a bike. The young man says he did, but his throat is so parched from running he can barely speak. You give him your carton of juice to help him speak and listen to what he has to say. After telling you which path he saw someone riding past on a bike, you head in that direction. You can probably tell by this time that you will eventually trade the cheese and the apples for information and most likely catch up to the thief. Finding him will be part of your adventure, and making it back home with a new supply of items for lunch will be the other part of your adventure. Here, it is easier to see the importance of your role in this story. You are the protagonist, and if, instead of heading to the store for your mother, you simply stayed in your room and played video games, there would be no story. Following your main character from the beginning of your story to the end of it is the only reason for wanting to read it. This is not to say that all the other components that help make up a story are not important, but their only purpose is to help your protagonist to get from wherever he started until he arrives at the place he is journeying to. I've already explained that without your protagonist, you have no story, and your story is only as good as your protagonist. So, you can imagine that your greatest challenge while creating your story, one, is making sure you have a dominating protagonist to lead your story, and two, making sure your protagonist is someone your reader will follow. You don't have to make sure that your protagonist is the hero, although in most cases he is. It's quite possible to have a protagonist who isn't a hero but still able to lead the story. If you stop and think about any of the classic stories that you've read or heard about, they all have at least one thing in common. Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, To Kill a Mockingbird, David Copperfield, Don Quixote, to name a few. All would fail as a story without the protagonist. Hero or not, your story cannot function as a story without the presence of your protagonist. When you sit down with an idea for your next story, once you have it, do yourself a favor and spend the necessary time to discover and then develop your protagonist, because whether or not you have come to the realization of just how important and vital he is to your story, the simple fact is the plot, the setting, the climax, the ending, and every other aspect of your story will all be for nothing if you don't first create a protagonist for the others to follow. And now I'll finish telling you about the story I call Taking You at Your Word. When Nyla couldn't think of any way of reaching Joseph, she suddenly remembered what her sister said to her about doing whatever she could to bring them together. So, that night, Nyla murdered her sister. Her thinking was this: since Joseph had shown up for their mother's funeral, he would likely show up for her sister's. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button, because you never know, my next video might just be helpful too.